Okay, we'll go ahead and get started in the interest of time because I have a feeling this is going to be an interesting topic that we hear today, and a little bit unusual for us here in North America. Welcome to our first ever global development workshop. There are people logged into this meeting that are in Australia, Europe, Brazil, and Mexico. It's cool to see how connected we have become as a company. Development workshops have been happening in North America for around a year, actually exactly 1 year this month, and they have been well attended and very well received throughout our business. And the concept started with this idea that the subject matter experts that can develop us and develop our teams are right here within our business. We have subject matter experts at JBS that can deliver content on feedback and leadership, goal setting, building confidence in yourself, and building trust with others. We also wanted to add some technical topics to these development workshops, which happen monthly. And those technical topics allow us, like the session that you'll see today, they allow us to see different areas of the business that we might not otherwise be exposed to. The topics that are selected for the behavioral stuff, or the stuff that's related to our values, are chosen based on running our 360 opportunity comments that we do every single year, and we now do across the globe, through an AI tool to summarize and select those topics. And then subject matter experts, once again, from within our business are selected to deliver those topics. So welcome to everyone who's joining us from across the globe. What you'll want to do is you'll want to enter in your attendance. I'll give you all a few minutes to do this while I get out of the way of the screen and let you do it. I want to talk a little bit about our speaker today. So our speaker today is Henri Batista. He has run the Huon Aquaculture business unit in Australia for the last couple of years and will be moving to Europe here shortly to join Pilgrims Europe in a different area of our business. I'll let him get into the introductions and that sort of thing. And before I pass it over to him to get this started, you will be able to access this recording in your online learning platform. So here in the United States, that's going to be JBS Online Learning or the University of Pilgrims. And then your online learning platforms operated by your learning and development teams in your respective regions will also upload it there as well. All right, Henri, we will take down this attendance slide and get your information up here, and then we can go ahead and get started. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for most of you. So my name is Henri or Henrique, whatever is easier. So I've been running Huon Aquaculture for almost 3 years now, and I'll just get into the presentation, just being conscious of time. So I'll share my presentation here. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we can.
All right. Good. So Huon Aquaculture is our salmon business here in Australia. It's our first endeavor into aquaculture in JBS. We've been selling and doing things around fish, but never really producing fish. So we've been with Huon just over 3 years now, and it's been a great experience. And I'd like just to talk about, what is aquaculture, how seafood plays a role in protein. So the agenda will be basically going from a very high level into, what we do down here in Huon. So overall, just looking at global seafood production, global aquaculture production. When we say aquaculture, it's basically fish farming or seafood farming. Then to the salmon production globally, talking about some of the salmon players around the world. How we farm, what is the life cycle of a salmon, here in Huon, what is their footprint, key metrics around salmon farming, which is, again, it's farming. It's very similar. There's a few nuances, but very similar. Talking about salmon consumption, sales for Huon, and overall sales worldwide, our sales strategy in Huon, and lastly, our sustainability strategy. So if you look at seafood production, it's worth noting before we talk about seafood that 71% of the world's surface is covered in water. So if you think about it, it's kind of a no-brainer that we have to produce more food out of the ocean. So in 2022, seafood production was estimated at 223 million tons a year. 185 million tons of that was animal production, and 38 million tons was algae. And out of that, about 57% of the seafood production is destined to human consumption. A lot of other things become ingredients and feed as well. So seafood is not only the biggest, but is the fastest growing protein category in the world. So I think, again, us as in JBS, I think we definitely have to be a part of this. But we're going to talk more about it, and there's clearly a few challenges on getting into a market like this. So over 230 countries in the world produce seafood, around $195 billion in revenue, which is a 19% increase from pre-pandemic levels in 2019. And if you look at the graph on the right, from 30 years ago, basically seafood was mostly fished or wild caught. But from the last 30 years, since let's say 1990, seafood production or wild caught seafood production has basically not grown at all. So if anyone expects to eat more seafood, and if we want to keep producing seafood, it has to be farmed. And looking forward again, there's not a lot of growth projections on wild caught. So if you look at the graph in the left bottom hand side here, basically that's a spread of fisheries. If you look at about a third of the total marine fishery stocks are overfished, which is a big concern. Almost half is sustainably produced, and very little is underfished. So again, there's not a lot of growth from wild caught seafood. And when I got here, I heard one thing which is quite interesting, which is if you think about the major protein categories in the world, if you think of beef, pork, chicken, lamb, seafood is actually the only protein production in the world people still hunt for somehow. So we still go out in the wild and we hunt for wild animals, which is nowadays it seems pretty, if you think about chicken and all the other proteins, it's pretty rudimental. So we really believe, that the future of seafood production is aquaculture. So aquaculture has, for the first time in 2022, surpassed wild fisheries, representing 51% of the total seafood production in the world. And when I say this is especially focused on animal aquaculture production. So total was 94.4 million tons of animal aquaculture products. So 62.6% of that was inland, basically ponds or rivers or freshwater systems, and only 37.4% was in marine, which again sounds crazy from that point of view, thinking about the size of the oceans we have around the world. There's hundreds of species that can be farmed in aquaculture, but really there's only a few of them that make up the majority of the production. And the projected increase for aquaculture is around 10% by 2032, which is 83% of the growth of aquaculture, or the growth of seafood is going to come from aquaculture. So for 3/3, more than 3/4 of the total seafood growth is going to come from aquaculture. If you look at global aquaculture production, and this is really focused on animal, so there's three major categories: finfish, which is fish basically, there's crustaceans, there's mollusks, and then there is other animals, which is very niche and a smaller category. The biggest species are low-valued species. So if you look at the top three, carps, catfish, the third one has a funny name, but it's tilapia. and then you go into salmon. So that's where we play a role in. And looking at all these categories, there's 3 good categories to play for JBS to play a role on, I believe. And first of all, it's salmon, which we're doing here in Tasmania. There's a huge salmon market we're going to touch on in the next slide. And I think the second biggest one and the second, best category within those species would probably be prawns or shrimp, which is a big category and profitable business and environmentally good. And the third one is sea bass and sea bream in Europe, which are also well managed and everything. They do a good job. A lot of those other species, they are either low valued, low margin, or they have somewhat risks associated to them. If you look into salmon farming across the world, salmon is an animal that does not regulate its body temperature. So you really require certain temperature to farm those fish. So you can farm salmon anywhere from 0 to 20 degrees Celsius, but optimal temperatures really are 8 to 14 for optimal growth. And that's only really found in certain latitudes across the world. So either, the real south of the southern hemisphere or the real north of the northern hemisphere. There's new technologies to farm salmon. There's a few new projects trying to do land-based salmon farming in tanks. There is actually quite a big project in Miami, actually, but they face a lot of challenges. You guys can look up, but it's not easy. It's very capital intensive, and they faced a lot of challenges, as any new technology would. Something to keep an eye on, but 90+% of salmon farming in the world is out in the oceans. So if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the production by country. So Norway is by far the biggest salmon producing country in the world. They produce more than half of the world's salmon. Chile is second. They have a great temperature profile, but they can face, and they have faced in the past, a few biosecurity challenges. The UK is third. Again, varies. They had a very good last year with production and overall performance. Canada depends. You have two sides of Canada. You have the West Coast and you have the East Coast. Canada can be a little bit too cold for salmon, and again, and they especially in BC, there's quite a problem politically around salmon farming in the West Coast, and that's mainly due to the so-called and the assumed impacts in wild salmon that are in the West Coast of Canada. You have the Faroe Islands, which is a very small island between Norway and Iceland. They're probably the best salmon farming region in the world. And then you have Australia, which is where we play a part, a role in. And Australia has its challenges. I think from a biosecurity point of view, we do a very good job. The only problem or the only challenge with Australia is summers are quite warm in Australia, and we go up to the bend there, reaching almost 20 degrees, which is not optimal for growth. And then there's a newest region, which is Iceland. Iceland is a very new region for salmon farming, and I think that's where probably the biggest potential for growth is. Going into salmon farming producers, so there's a few big companies in salmon farming. So the biggest company in the world is Maui, which is the one in the right-hand side, in the left-hand side. Maui produces, this is old data from 2023, but Maui just closed the year 2024 with over 500,000 tons of salmon produced in the year. The second one would be Salmar, which is the one below. They produce around, again, 2023 was 250. They closed the year at around 300,000 tons produced. And the third one is in Chile, which is Aquachile, which produced around 200,000 tons of salmon. You have other ones. So if you look at Maui, Maui has salmon farming in every single farming region in the world, except from Australia and New Zealand. Some are there predominantly in Norway. They do have a 50% share in a Scottish aquaculture, Scottish Sea Farms, which is an aquaculture salmon farmer in Scotland, and they have a share as well in Iceland. And Aquachile, they're basically in Chile. But if you look at the volumes and the revenue and the results that salmon farmers across the world achieve, it's pretty amazing. You know, if you look for Maui, for example, in there, you know, after COVID, they were still ramping back up, but basically 24% EBITDA a year. You look at Salmar reaching 30% EBITDA a year. Baccafrost again, they're doing 30% EBITDA a year. So it's a very profitable business. If you look at Baccafrost, actually, if you take Scotland out of Baccafrost, it would be a lot higher. There would probably be almost in the 40% EBITDA margins. So again, it's a great sector to be in. It's not as easy to enter as you would expect with such high margins, and it is a very competitive market. If you look at Norway, it's a pretty consolidated market. In the UK, there's only basically 3 players. In the UK, in the Faroes is the same thing. Chile, there's more space, and if you look at the margins, you'd expect why. So margins in Chile are not as great. So basically, if you look at the Northern Hemisphere, so if you look at Norway, Faroes, the UK, Iceland, so they have very good production costs. They have a very low freight cost. So basically, some of them can truck fish into Europe, and they have a good overall average price. If you look at Chile, it's a bit different. So they have a good cost, very low cost for producing salmon. They can face a few challenges year on year with biosecurity, as I mentioned. But the biggest problem with Chile is the distance and how hard it is to get to the market. So most of Chilean salmon goes into the US. So if you think about getting salmon and boxes of salmon from the south of the Patagonia region in Chile, delivered into Miami, you know, it's basically a 3-day truck drive into Santiago, and then you have to fly them to Miami, which is quite expensive. And then in Australia here, what happens to us is we have a higher production cost. Our average delivery cost varies between the 2 main markets that we play in. Domestically, it's a good freight cost. If you look at exports, which is mainly Asia for us here, it is more expensive, but overall it's controlled. But the biggest thing in Australia is we probably have one of the highest prices in the world. So that's what makes us competitive in Australia. One thing to note is every export of salmon is done through air freight, and air freight is somewhat expensive. Fish are transferred in poly boxes, in 20-kilo poly boxes, styrofoam boxes. So yeah, freight plays a huge role in salmon farming. Talking about our farming process, I'm going to play a video here, which is a 5-minute video. It gives basically an overview of human aquaculture, and then I'll go down into the farming and how we farm salmon here in human aquaculture.
Henry,
Yep.
we're not hearing it here.
Oh,
We're not
okay.
hearing it here. Maybe unshare your screen and then reshare it with audio and visual. Henry, if you want to stop sharing your screen
Yep.
and then
Just
reshare with
it here.
audio and visual. Yeah.
Yep.
It takes a little time.
Yep. Okay. Share. You can see my screen?
We can.
Right.
Over the last 35 years, aquaculture has created an unrivaled reputation on the world stage for producing the finest quality Atlantic salmon and ocean trout. Huon have been pioneers in raising salmon, continually innovating to improve the quality of life for our salmon. A lot has changed over 35 years, but our focus on fish welfare has always been a priority. We are the only salmon producer to offer Australian RSPCA-approved salmon. Huon salmon are raised in the cool, clean waters of Tasmania, at the edge of the wild Southern Ocean, where the untouched, pristine, oxygen-rich waters are an ideal environment for raising Atlantic salmon that are healthy and delicious, offering a full-flavoured experience and superior product. The welfare of our fish is just as important as their pristine environment. Like salmon in the wild, Huon salmon start their life in fresh water. Our state-of-the-art nursery has world-leading water recirculation technology, resulting in 100% freshwater reuse, minimising water usage and ensuring optimum water quality for our fish. This freshwater facility also reduces the amount of time fish are at sea, resulting in a more sustainable life cycle, producing more protein with fewer natural resources. Huon was the first in the Southern Hemisphere to adopt this technology. Huon uses wellboats to transfer salmon to sea. These wellboats are used to freshwater bathe fish at sea to ensure the best health outcomes. Huon Aquaculture was the first company in the world to use wellboats to bathe fish. More than half of our salmon at sea are raised at offshore sites. This is another pioneering innovation by Huon, providing both better welfare for our fish and better outcomes for the environment. These sites are some of the biggest in the world, giving our fish plenty of room to swim and school naturally, as they would in the wild. Here, the fast-flowing water and strong currents deliver oxygen to our fish and accelerate sediment breakdown. This combination of water flow, wind and waves is a benefit to both the fish and the environment. Huon's innovative technology allows the fish and the environment to be monitored 24 hours per day. And our own AI system ensures that our fish are fed to appetite with our high-quality feed sourced from safe and sustainable ingredients. We are globally recognised for our nighttime harvest that provides a low-stress environment for our fish by removing Huon salmon from the water at the last possible moment. This less stressful environment means quality is maintained during harvest, delivering the highest quality salmon to our customers. All our fish are transported to our safe quality food accredited smokehouse and product innovation centre. This processing facility allows for greater control of food safety variables, with whole fish being processed and value-added products produced and then dispatched from the same location. As a signatory to the Australian Packaging Covenant organisation, we are committed to reducing packaging waste. We have transitioned 100% of Huon's premium range to recyclable packaging, and we continue to work with our suppliers to implement innovative, eco-friendly packaging for all our products, as we work towards a 2025 target of fully reusable, recyclable or compostable packaging. Huon has developed a sustainability strategy with ambitious targets, including our goal to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. Huon has also been a leader in circular economy practices by reusing our byproducts for pet food, compost and fish meal. Our farming practices result in exceptional quality salmon and trout that have been safely and sustainably produced. Our award-winning Huon salmon and ocean trout are renowned by chefs around the world, looking to provide the best possible dining experience for their customers.
All right. So now I'll talk a little bit more about farming.
Over the last 35
So basically, the growth cycle of a fish, I think that's a very interesting one, which was a huge surprise when I got here. It actually takes 2 years to grow salmon. It's not a quick process. So basically what happens is we have our broodstock, so our breeders. So fish in the wild, salmon in the wild, they would normally spawn once a year, which would be around winter. And what we do here is we can't only have one egg production a year. So we have different fish in different light and temperature regimes in tanks. So we induce them to think it's winter certain times of the year for them to give us eggs all year round. So once we have the eggs, we mix it with the milk and it fertilizes the eggs. After the eggs are fertilized, it takes around 450 degree days, which is a funny concept in salmon farming. So basically, salmon is pretty much dictated by temperature. So if you do things warmer, they go faster. If you do things colder, they do it slower. So when you talk about 450 degrees days, that's basically days times the degree, how many degrees they're on in the water. So 450 degrees days adds up to about 10 weeks. So after 10 weeks, they hatch. After they hatch, they become an alevin. If you look in the photo, they still have a yolk sitting on the bottom attached to their body. They will take another 450 degree days, which is 10 weeks, to consume the yolk. And then after that, they become a fry. So in a fry, they start eating feed, so pelletized feeds, very small feeds. And then you put them in a small tank, and after they become a par, you put them in a larger tank, and in a smolt, you put them in a larger tank, and you start increasing the size of the feeds. So basically, it's 1 year in fresh water. So it takes 1 year to grow the fish from hatched egg, an alevin, to basically 400-gram fish, and another year out at sea in the marine environment. If you look at our process here, we are vertically integrated. So we start from our selective breeding program that we do it in-house. So we select for 3 main traits here in Huon. We select for growth. We select for water temperature resistance. Like I said, summer here in Tasmania can be quite warm. So we select for those fish that are more resistant to warm temperatures. And the third one, which was mentioned in the last video there, is around AGD resistance. So AGD is one thing that it's a one-celled organism that is present in the water here. It's endemic to Tasmania, and there's all different sorts of AGD all around the world. Native fish here in Tasmania, they're resistant to it, but our fish are not. So what happens is that one-celled organism can start growing in their gills. And since they are a one-celled organism in a marine environment, once you put fish in fresh water, the bacteria, or it's not a bacteria, it's a one-celled organism, basically dies off. So what we have to do is every 30 days to 3 months, depending on the time of the year, we have to get our fish, put them inside one of the well boats filled with fresh water. We keep them in fresh water for 2 hours, and then we pump them back to the ocean, and that clears up the AGD. But again, those boats are big boats and they're quite expensive. So we try to breed them to be more resistant to it so we can reduce the amount of times we bathe the fish. So when salmon farming started here in Tasmania, they used to bathe fish 12 times a year. It has gone down to as low as 6 nowadays. So the genetics has made a huge improvement. We have our hatcheries. So all our hatcheries are freshwater hatcheries where we grow a fish to a smolt stage. We have our marine farms, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes. We have our feed management, so feed delivery, our feed barges, which are basically silos and water. And we also have our control room here in Hobart. So basically here in the office, we have about 15 people that feed our fish all out of the office. The system is basically, there's a camera about, let's say 7 meters down in the water column, looking up, and you start feeding, and the fish will be eating in the surface. When you start seeing pellets come through the camera, you know they're not eating as much. So we have an AI system that will detect the pellet coming down, and then we have thresholds. So after a few pellets coming through, it will lower the feed rate. It will lower. If it stops coming through, it might stay or it might bump up until a point where it just shuts down as the fish are full. And that's an amazing technology developed actually in-house in Huon. And yeah, it's amazing to see basically 9 million fish being fed through a control room here in the office. Net management, we have a lot of nets. We have more than 100 pens out in the water. Some pens have 2 nets, some pens have 3 nets. So that's between 200 and 300 nets that we have to manage, clean, fix. Every time we have to follow a site and so on. So that's a lot of work goes into that. We have our bathing. So we have 2 rowboats that do the bathing. We have the Ronia Storm, which is 112 meters long. And we have the Ronia Huon, which is about 75 meters long. So they're big boats. You can put up to 800 tons in the storm of live fish, and you can keep them there for basically over a day. You can, there's water temperature control, there's salinity control, there's oxygen, there's everything. It's just basically a big aquarium inside a boat. We have predator controls. We have a lot of predators down here in Australia, especially seals. So we have to manage them sometimes with holes and nets and everything. We have to manage to get them out of our nets. We have to do lighting. So we have to light up pens in the ocean. As I mentioned, fish will mature and will spawn at certain times of the year. And what we do is we want to avoid our production fish to mature, because once a salmon matures, it basically uses all its energy, all its flesh quality to produce eggs. So after a fish spawns, the quality is not as good. So we light them up to try to avoid them thinking it's the time of year for them to mature. We follow our leases, so we have to follow our smolt leases for 4 weeks every time you go into a new year class or a new generation. So we do all of that ourselves. We harvest our fish. Harvesting fish is quite an interesting process, very simple. Salmon have a natural tendency to swim against the current. So what we do is we basically have channels where we pump water against the fish. They will swim against the current. They will basically hit a trigger, which will knock them in the head and cut their gills. And that's basically how you harvest a salmon. Very simple process and very humane, because they're basically swimming against the current. And then we do our processing. So processing, we have 2 factories. We have one that we do what we call hog. And when we say hog, it's not pigs, it's head on gutted. So it's a fish with their heads, with their guts removed. After we do a hog, we fillet them. We also do hot smoked portions. We get our fillets and we portion them, put them in map trays. And with the excess eggs we have from our production, we also produce caviar here. So Huon, this is the map of Tasmania. We have 9 freshwater facilities, so 9 nurseries and hatcheries, where we keep either our broodstocks or our fish or small fish. We have 3 main farming regions. We have Macquarie Harbour in the west coast, and we have Hewan and Channel, which is the longest farm that we had. And the newest one is Storm Bay. Storm Bay is what we call our offshore farms. They're quite challenging farm to farm. It's very high energy. We've had up to 12-meter swells come through our farms. So you can imagine basically a 4-story building wave come through a farm, which is quite challenging. Last year alone, we had 3 major storms, one at 9 meters, one at 7-meter swells, and another one at 10-meter swells. And that was all within 6 weeks, which is a very busy period for us. And then processing, we have 2 main processing facilities. We have PMC, which is Port Creek in the north of the state, and we have New South Wales, which is in Sydney. So basically all our fish come from the south. They're processed in Port Creek in the north of the state. We do hog fillets and hot smoke in that facility. They're then transported into the city up north called Devonport. That's where you have a ferry that will take our fish from Tasmania to the mainland. This ferry will arrive in Melbourne, and from Melbourne it goes to our customers or to the airport to be flown all over the world. Quite an interesting thing as well. We can harvest our fish down in the south of Tasmania and deliver to China within 36 hours. So in this case, in this situation, we're the best country, or the best company actually, to service Asia, because Chile is far, Norway is far, and we deliver fish really fresh to our markets. In New South Wales, the factory we have in Sydney, basically we get fillets and we portion them and we put them in map trays for retail. Key metrics, very similar to farming, any other farming species. FCRs, FCR is a big one. Food conversion. Average FCRs for salmon sits at 1.3. There's a lot of countries like Norway, Chile, Faroes, where they can get 1.1s, 1.05s. So very good conversion rates. So 1.1 kilo of feed for every kilo of fish. Funny enough, fish in fresh water have a negative conversion rate. So you feed 900 grams of fish or feed, they will turn it into a kilo of salmon because they intake fresh water as well. Mortality, of course, is a huge one for any farmer. Normal mortality would sit around 15%. 10% would be a good mortality rate for salmon farming in the marine environment. But again, there's biosecurity challenges like any other farmers, and things can spike, but normal would be around 15 and good would be around 10. Smolt weight, which is an interesting one, this is a very important metric for salmon, because basically all the risks involved in salmon farming, or 90% of the risks involved in salmon farming, are in the marine environment. In the marine environment, you have very little control of biosecurity because you're basically in the open ocean. You can have migratory fish come through your pen, and disease can spread. So it's a very risky environment. You have weather events, storms, and all of that. So the bigger you put your smolt in, the less time it stays out in the ocean. And that improves mortality, that improves FCR, that improves sustainability. So it's something that we're very focused in. So if you get 100-gram fish, if you put to sea 100-gram fish, it takes 16 months for harvest, 200 grams, 14 months, 300 grams, 12 months, 400 grams, 11 months, 500 grams, 10 months, 600 grams, 9 months. So we're sitting today at around 350 grams or 300 and something grams for release at sea. So our fish are spending 12 months. Going into markets and also the sustainability. So biggest salmon consumer in the world is the USA. 650,000 tons are consumed in the USA with a 2 kilo per capita consumption. France is the biggest consumption per capita. They consume a lot of salmon, over 3.5 kilos per year per capita. And then you have us in Australia consuming about 60 to 70,000 tons in Australia, with a high consumption per capita as well. Our biggest opportunity here is Asia or China. If you look at China, the consumption per capita is extremely low. You have countries like Italy, Spain, even Brazil is similar consumption to China, and so that's a big, a big opportunity for us. And I think one of the not challenges, but one of the things we faced the last few years is just the relative difference price of salmon, compared to other proteins. So salmon has really gone up in price, and from in some sort of way that's good, but from a consumption point of view, that can slow down things. Here in Huon, very high levels. We're 43% exports. Our main markets are China, and then Vietnam, Japan, basically overall Asia are our main markets. We play a big role in wholesale, which is basically food service in all the states across Australia. And then we do part of retail as well, 22% share of our market, of our business. Huon was traditionally a company that would only do food service and exports. But we're changing that because there's certainly a lot of opportunity in the retail space here in Australia. So what we've done in the retail space is we've done a major brand relaunch here in Australia with our brand. We're trying to reach a premium position. So if you look at the old packagings, the new packagings, we actually launched our product last year. In most of the stores, they're already the biggest selling item in those stores per unit, which is a huge achievement in the last 5 months. If you look at exports, which is our biggest market, we always compare ourselves with a good index to compare ourselves is Fishbowl, which is basically what is the salmon FOB price out of Norway. And you can see that in exports, price varies a lot. So prices can go up from 130 NOK in the beginning of the year and in the first half to 70 NOK, which is a huge fluctuation. So what our focus is here as well is trying to get more fish in the first half of the year to achieve the higher prices. The other thing as well to note is retail and key accounts, their annual price, their fixed price, so you don't have a lot of movement. And if you look in the right-hand side, fish are graded by size, and the bigger the fish, the more expensive they are, especially in the Asian markets. The Asian markets really like big fish. But again, there's fluctuation across the year. The spread can be very high in the beginning of the year, so bigger fish in the beginning of the year are amazing prices. But again, if you look, in the back end of the year, or in the middle of the year, prices are not so different from a 4 to 5 kilo fish from a 6+ kilo fish. So we're always trying to, understand those gaps and try to have the right size and the right time of the year. From a sustainability point of view, and I know this information I got out of the one on the left, I got out of Salmon Farmer report, and I know some of the guys that work with chicken and pork might say, oh, maybe my FCR is a bit lower than that, but overall salmon, they have a very good FCR, 1.3 average FCR. The protein retention is great, 28%. Edible meat per 100 grams, 56 kilos for 100 kilos of feed. Carbon footprint are very low. Again, a good point. The reason why salmon is such a good converter in food is basically salmon. First of all, they don't have to control their temperature, so they don't waste energy on that. And the second thing is they don't fight gravity, so they're floating, so they don't grow big bones. So they can convert their food very well. And one of the key points as well is the water consumption is very low for salmon. So it's again, they're mostly out in the ocean, so very low freshwater consumption. Again, our sustainability, this is our sustainability targets, or not targets, but focuses: environment, animals, people, and product. But our main strategy here in Huon is to be the leader in 2 sectors. In land-based aquaculture, and when I say land-based, it's growing big smolt, so reducing the time they spend in the ocean, and offshore farming, which is which is basically where I see the industry growing towards. And from a sustainability point of view, it's also beneficial. So again, our target here, today we sit at 12 months in the freshwater, 12 months in the marine environment. We want to push it for a fish to spend 17 months in the freshwater or in a controlled environment, and only 7 months out at sea. So I think doing that, we would really reduce, it would be very beneficial from a sustainability point of view, but also from a financial point of view. And how do we do that? There's this technology which we call RAS here, which is recirculating aquaculture systems, which is most of our hatcheries nowadays, most of our fish are growing in RAS. So what happens there, it's basically a bunch of tanks with a huge water treatment system. So if you look at our Whale Point facility, which is our biggest RAS system, it is the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere. We recirculate 99% of the water. So 99% of the water is reused every single day. It goes to the fish, it's cleaned, it goes back to the fish, it's clean. And that's every 30 minutes. So you can imagine the amount of water that we have to clean and treat every single day. And the 1% it's released, so you take out the nutrients and the waste, that goes to fertilizer. And the 1% of water that we have to dispose of, we basically irrigate in paddocks. So a very good way to manage. So the overall, our priority here in Huon is doing that. I think that's how you can increase salmon production here in Australia, and I think around the world, that's what other companies have done as well. Again, growing big fish in controlled environments, cleaning up the water, really managing your waste properly, and spending very little time at sea, and pushing farms more to offshore sites. So that was a quick one. I tried to summarize what I've managed to learn in the last 3 years in 45 minutes. So I'll just now probably open up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Henri. We do have some questions already in the chat. Do you harvest when they get to a certain weight or age?
Yep. So it's not really not really age. We harvest our fish. Depends on the time of the year. So for example, now we're probably harvesting fish at 4.5 kilo hog. So without the guts, so that would be a 5 kilo live fish. And what we do is we put them in the water at a certain size. We model the temperatures and the time they're going to be at sea. And we know, basically next year we already know what size, or we estimate what size we're going to have for each time of the year.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, how many brood stock do you have to be able to produce that many eggs per year?
Yeah, so a brood stock would normally produce 1,000 eggs per kilo of live breeder or brood stock. So if you have a 10 kilo fish, it will produce 10,000 eggs. You could basically, I'm just going to do a quick calculation. We could do our production with around 2,000 brood stocks. We could probably do our own, all of our production. So not a lot of them. And then males, they're very low numbers. You could probably do all of Huon with 50 males.
Okay, thank you. We've got tons of questions, so I'm going to you're probably going to end up answering quite a few today because we still have 11 minutes left for this.
That's all right. That's good.
Yeah, it is good. Why is it better for them to be in the ocean for less time? And how long are our competitors having them in the ocean for?
Yeah. So keeping them in the ocean for less time is good because you don't face all the biosecurity risks. When you have them in a RAS system or in a system that I just explained, the water is treated, the water is UV'd, the water is ozoned. So it goes through a lot of treatments to kill all bacteria and any pathogens. When you go out in the water, I know that other farming segments face biosecurity challenges, but for us especially, I mean, we have nets. So any fish, any small fish, any, sardine or any other migratory fish can come in through the net and have contact with our fish. So that's a big risk. And the other thing is just overall risks around the infrastructure. Looking at Storm Bay, which is one of our sites, you really want, to keep them there for at least time as possible and just get on top of your maintenance and, getting things ready for the next, lot of fish. So it just reduces the overall risk. And I forgot the size of the fish. So actually at 300 to 350 grams, we're actually quite a good size compared to our competitors. Our local competitors here, I do not know. There's not any data available of what size they transfer their fish at. I'll just give an example of Chile. Chile can, they probably transfer average at 150 grams, which is basically almost 3 months less at sea.
Okay. This question tags on to the last question. In terms of infrastructure for making that transition to less time at sea, do you need to build bigger onshore tanks or pins, or can you do it with the current facilities?
No, we have to build. So last year we announced $110 million to more than duplicate the size of our Whale Point facility. So yeah, we're investing a lot of money on those sites, on those type of technologies.
Okay. Since temperatures are rising almost everywhere, what is the long-term plan for dealing with that? Or do you have any thoughts on what that could look like?
It's there's one thing only you can do about it, and that's genetics. So if you look at our fish here, they're probably the most resistant water temperature fish in the world. So if you took our fish and put them in Canada, for example, they'll probably struggle with the cold. So we can farm our fish and they can still grow up to 14, 15 kilos. Once it goes over 16, it gets a bit harder. But every year through our breeding program, we're selecting for high temperature resistance fish.
Great.
And I believe it's manageable. I believe we can keep on top of it with genetics.
Are there any questions in the room? Go ahead.
What determines a good offshore site with all the benefits of offshore? Is that water temperatures along with depths or distance from the shore? What makes a good site for that?
For offshore, the biggest thing is it has to be farmable, because I mean, if you talk about, our offshore sites, they're quite rough, but they're somewhat closer. So it has to be, first of all, it has to be farmable. We have a what we call significant wave height. Storm Bay, for example, it's sitting at 6.5 meters. If you go beyond that, it's very hard to farm. But again, you have to look at currents, you have to look at water flow, you have to look at oxygen profiles. Whenever we do, when Hewin went through this system or through this process of getting Storm Bay, there's a lot of things that you have to look on. So yeah.
Can you repeat that?
One? Yeah.
Regarding animal welfare.
Animal welfare.
Difference between keeping more time on the land base or keeping more time on an offshore.
Henry, she asked,
Yeah.
what with regard to animal welfare, what's the difference between them being on land versus them being in the sea?
I wouldn't say there's much of a difference. I think in a freshwater site, they're in a controlled environment, they're in a sterile environment, and they get, there's no predators, there's no no risk, let's say. So I think, yes, in a controlled environment, fish welfare can be a little bit better, but I mean, if you manage them well in the ocean environment, you can do as well as in a hatchery.
Another question, 5 years from now, what does success look like for Huon, and what are your growth strategies?
Yeah, so we have developed quite a growth strategy here in Huon, and it's basically focusing in again growing our fish bigger on land. So we're investing in new broodstock facilities. We're investing in a new well point, which is a recirculating aquaculture system. We're investing in a rendering facility, which is something that we don't have yet, which would make a huge difference for us. But I think there's success in all different areas, but I think we have to first of all achieve our optimal volume and utilize our existing capacity. Of course, we have to be profitable, and in a sales base, Huon has a very good brand, and we've developed our brand very well, especially in the food service space. But I think, from a retail space, I think we really have to be the leaders in the category from a branding perspective.
Another question in the room?
You had mentioned the different types of farmable seafood, if you will. Is there any plan beyond salmon down the road?
I wouldn't say, we do have leases to produce yellowtail kingfish in Western Australia. For now, in Huon, our focus has been in salmon. We have a lot going on here within regards of getting our investments up and running. So at this stage, it's not a plan to get the team's focus out of this investment. But I think for JBS overall, it makes absolutely sense to explore, more, to grow more in aquaculture. I think salmon is probably the clearest path that we have on aquaculture. But you have to understand different species in different regions. If you look at, I mentioned three regions. I think salmon farming is good. It's good overall all over the world. Ecuador shrimp is good. I don't know much about it, but I heard it's good. Sea bass and sea bream, I've heard different mixed reviews, especially in Europe. But yeah, I think our focus would be initially in salmon.
Okay, one last question as it relates to growth. It sounds like your primary target for exports is Asia at the moment. Do you plan to target any other regions such as US or Europe?
I think, Asia still has a huge potential for us. And we're doing a lot more in countries that we didn't use to play a role in. For example, if you look at Asia only, we barely sell to South Korea, and South Korea is a huge market for salmon. So there's still a lot we can do in Asia. The US, we do sell a little bit, on and off to the US, especially it has to be to the West Coast because of just time to transport the fish. What plays a huge role in exports for us is freight cost. So there are flights from US or from Australia to the US, but the freight can be quite expensive. And the challenge about the US is every country in the world sends a lot of fish to the US. Chile sends a lot of fish to the US. Norway sends a lot of fish to the US. So if you want to compete against them in the US, you have to find your, a niche premium category to play a role in. If you want to play in price, you're not going to win that fight. So we have to find, a good market and a good positioning for us as a brand.
Great. Well, if everyone could help me in thanking Henri for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Henry. My team is going to pull up the attendance link one more time for those who have not had the opportunity to fill out the attendance link. There's one for the US and Canada and one for the global teams. Thank you all for joining. The recording of this session will be uploaded into your online learning platforms in your respective regions. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.